welcome back to the Cyclonic Thrift Channel, your home for competitive Magic on a budget. As always, please hit that like button and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get thrifty. Alright, the commander we'll be looking at today is Eriette of the Charmed Apple. She's a new commander from the Wilds of Eldraine set, and she's a white and a black for a legendary creature, Human Warlock, 2/4. Each creature that's enchanted by an aura you control can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of auras you control. So this is just super interesting. So Orzhov Enchantress with auras is not necessarily a new strategy. It's something that has a lot of support historically in Magic, but the particular strategy that this commander wants us to pursue is pretty unique. So first of all, it's very pillow forty, where you're really putting auras on other creatures more than your own, and just making sure that they can't attack you. You know, they're not goaded or anything, they don't have to attack, but you can give them, auras, you can pump them, you can give them different effects that will mess with your opponents and can kind of play into the politic realm a lot more than traditional Enchantress decks can. And then the second part of this, where your opponents are losing X life and you're gaining X life, where X is the number of auras, this is super similar to some of the new Enchantress decks we saw with Commander Masters, where there's just mass life loss in response to your enchantments. And this is going to be super helpful, because with politics and with enchanting other creatures that you don't control, there's a certain level of how are you going to end the game, right? You're going to make other creatures not able to attack you, but if you can't attack into them because they're larger and bigger and more scary than your creatures because you've been pumping them, how are you going to be able to take out players? And this last ability is that way. Our goal is to get out as many auras as we can, keep them on the battlefield as long as we can, spread them out, and yeah, just drain, for 5, 6, maybe even 10 life at a certain point, and then keep our life total super healthy, super high, and keep all of everybody's scariest creatures from attacking us. So to start, I want to talk about some auras, that we're going to be putting on other people's creatures. The first is Spirit Link. It's 1 white for an enchantment aura. You enchant creature, and whenever enchanting creature deals damage, you gain that much life. So it's essentially lifelink for someone else's creature. Again, if they're not choosing to attack with it, whether it's you or anybody else, even if they block with it, you're going to be gaining life. And it, again, a super low-to-the-ground enchantment. This is something that'll be super easy to get out, and will hopefully put in a lot of work through the course of a game. Next is Dead Man's Chest. It's 1 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature an opponent controls. When enchanted creature dies, exile cards equal to its power from the top of its owner's library. You may cast spells from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells. So this is a great card advantage type of aura, where maybe we put it on their commander or a super high powered creature that they have. Maybe we kill it a little bit later, or somebody else does, and we essentially get to have access to a certain number of cards from their library. Whether or not they'll be helpful, who knows, but any type of card advantage in commander is going to be super helpful, and especially coming from an aura. This is a very unique card, and something that fits perfectly into what we're trying to do. And then the third one here is Nettlevine Blight. It's 4 and 2 black for an enchantment aura. It is, I think, the most expensive aura that we've got in this deck. Enchant creature or land. An enchanted permanent has, at the end of your turn, sacrifice this permanent and attach Nettlevine Blight to a creature or land you control. So this is this is kind of mean, and if you don't necessarily want to play this, that's totally fine. My reasoning is it's such a high mana cost that it's not that salty of a card. But essentially, we choose a player, we put it on something of theirs, and unless they end up destroying this aura at some point, it's just going to be passed from creature to creature or land to land, and they're going to have to keep reducing their board. It might not be super effective against like a token deck, but against a deck that, you know, maybe a Voltron type of play, this can mess with their strategy a lot. Next, as with all enchantment-centered decks, we want to have some payoffs for when we play those enchantments. So the first is Dawnheart Geist. It's 1 and a white for a creature, Spirit Warlock. It's a 1/3. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 2 life. Super easy, super simple. Again, plays into the life gain strategy, trying to keep our life total healthy. It'll be nice to get this down early and then play all of our enchantments after it, gain some life off of it. The next is Grim Guardian. It's 2 and a black for an enchantment creature zombie. It's a 1/4, and it has Constellation. Whenever Grim Guardian or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is kind of the flip side. It plays into our life loss strategy for our opponents. Again, we're going to be playing a ton of enchantments, so any added life loss it just plays right into what we're trying to do. And then finally we've got Archon of Sun's Grace. It's 2 and 2 white for a creature Archon. It's a 3/4 with flying and lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. And another constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. So, again, as we're playing enchantments, we're going to be making creatures. And, you know, flying blockers, I think, just plays well into our Pillow Fort type of strategy. But in addition to them having lifelink, we're going to be helping our life gain aspect as well. This is just going to be a super helpful card, especially as, I mean, you know, we pump up everybody else's board, but we're also populating our own board with blockers if we need them, or flying attackers if we want to just finish off a player. And then finally, a big downside of auras in general is that if the creature that they're attached to is removed, they go to the graveyard. They don't stay on the battlefield like other permanents. So we're going to want a way to recur those auras from our graveyard as consistently as we can. So one of those cards is Resurgent Belief. It's a sorcery with Suspend 2, 1 and a white. So essentially you pay 1 and a white, put this card into exile, and put 2 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a time counter from it, and when the last is removed, you cast it for free. And then return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And it also says, auras with nothing to enchant remain in your graveyard. So this is a little bit more of a splash play, right? You want to cast this like right after you know, a board wipe's happened, after people are starting to rebuild their boards. You know, it takes a turn or two to kind of get back to where everybody was. And at that point, you'll be able to return all of your auras attached to whichever creatures that you want. So either put them all into one creature or spread them out, you know, whichever makes the most sense in the moment. But essentially, it's just going to be this mass recursion that's going to be super helpful in basically just restoring your board state after a catastrophic event. The second card here is Luris of the Dream Den. It's 1 and 2 Orzhov, so you can pay either white or black for either pip. It's a legendary creature, Cat Nightmare. It's a 3/2. It has Companion, but we're not using it as a Companion, so it doesn't matter. It has Lifelink, and during each of your turns, you can cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. So there is some restriction there, where it has to be a cheap permanent card, but we have tons of auras that are 1 and 2 mana. So having this trigger every turn is going to be super helpful for keeping our strategy going, keeping the aura state on the board super healthy, and yeah, helping Eriette to drain people's life for as much as possible. And then finally we have Sun Titan. It's 4 and 2 white for a creature giant. It's a 6/6 with Vigilance. Whenever Sun Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, you can return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, essentially the same thing. You don't have to cast it, which is nice. You don't have to pay the mana. But yeah, if you're returning an aura, you just return it and attach it to whichever creature that you want. Yeah, both of these cards are going to be super consistent and super helpful in kind of bringing back the things that people are removing from us. And that brings us to the veggies section of this deck tech. As with every budget deck, you want to make sure you eat your veggies, or else you're not going to really be able to consistently compete with some of the high-powered, higher budget decks at the table. And by veggies, I just mean cards that fit into the categories of mana ramp, card draw, and targeted removal. You want to make sure you have plenty of cards in each of those categories to be able to propel your strategy forward. So I'm just going to go through some of the mana ramp here real quick. We've got Hero of Erois. It's 1 and a white for a creature, human, soldier, 2/2. It has aura spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. Perfect. We're going to have a ton of auras, casting a ton of auras, so we're going to be reducing that cost often. It also has whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of Erois, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is a little bit less relevant because the auras that we're going to be casting will be targeting other creatures. But, you know, if you happen to find one in a certain situation that makes sense, then yeah, you pump them up a little bit, and that's great. Next is Killian Ink Duelist. It's a white and a black for legendary creature, human, warlock, 2/2. It has lifelink and menace, and spells you cast that target a creature cost 2 less to cast. Guess what, guys? Auras target creatures. So it's essentially doubling up on that cost reduction, and we'll be able to just reduce that cost immensely for every aura that we cast. This is going to be an all-star, I guarantee it. You get it down early and you get that mana reduction down. And the third one here is Starfield Mystic. It's 1 and a white for a creature, human, cleric. It's a 2/2. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Starfield Mystic. So unlike Hero of Erois, this ability will actually be a little bit more relevant, because as people are removing the creatures that have our auras on them, they're going to be put into our graveyard, so we'll be able to pump up Starfield a little bit more consistently. Moving on to the card draw aspect of this deck, what's super nice about Enchantress decks, even if it's just auras, is there's plenty of options. So we've got a lot of really good low-to-the-ground card draw pieces here. The first of those cards is Core Spirit Dancer. It's 1 and a white for a creature, core wizard, 0/2. It gets +2/+2 for each aura attached to it, and whenever you cast an aura spell, you may draw a card. So again, the first part of that, similar to Hero of Erois, is not going to be super relevant. We're not really going to put auras on her, but that second part is definitely going to help us out. As we're casting auras, we're going to draw cards, keep our hand size healthy, be able to kind of roll forward with our strategy here, not get stuck. SRAM, Senior Edificer, 1 and a white for legendary creature, Dwarf Advisor, 2/2. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Super simple. We're casting a lot of auras, we're going to draw a lot of cards. And then Mesa Enchantress. It's 1 and 2 white for a creature, human, druid. It's a 0/2. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. And then as we get into the removal side of this deck, we've got Feed the Swarm. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. You destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Our life total is going to be super healthy, so we're going to have life to use as a resource. So this removal spell is super cheap, and yeah, will be a big winner in this deck. D-Spark, it's white and a black for an instant. Exile target permanent with mana value 4 or greater. It'll hit most of their commanders at the table. It'll hit more of the more threatening pieces, and the fact that it's any permanent is something that will be super useful. There's nothing worse than having a removal spell in your hand, but it doesn't hit quite the thing that you want it to hit. And as long as it's mana value 4 or greater, that won't be a problem for this card. And then for board wipes, we've got Doomscar, which is 3 white sorcery, destroy all creatures, super simple, but it also has Foretell. So during our turn, we can pay 2 and exile it face down, and then we can cast it for 1 and 2 white on a later turn. So this is just a way to kind of spread out the cost, and it'll be super helpful because it's hard with board wipes when you cast it on your turn and then you don't really have enough mana to rebuild and everybody else gets a chance to rebuild first. But in this way you get a little bit more leeway in that you're only really paying 3 mana to wipe the board, and then you can use the rest of your mana to bring things back to a more competitive place on your own side. And that brings us to the thrift pick of this deck. For those of you who have watched before, the thrift pick is not necessarily the best card in the deck, but it's the card that I'm most excited to play, that I think will have a really big impact based on our strategy and what we're trying to go for. And that card for this deck is Bloodthirsty Blade. It's a 2 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and is goaded. And you can pay 1 to attach Bloodthirsty Blade to target creature an opponent controls, and you activate it only as a sorcery. So this is a thing where, with Eriette, it's super nice that any creature that's enchanted by an aura we control can attack us, right? But that doesn't mean it has to attack at all. It's not goaded. So I can see a situation where we pump everybody else's creatures, we make sure they can't attack us, but they don't end up attacking other people either, unless they're playing very combat-heavy, aggressive decks. This is a way to kind of pick and choose which creatures we want to actually get out there and get into the red zone and start hitting people. Yeah, so I think this will be a way to kind of, again, politic a little bit, like, hey, you don't want me to goad your creature? Then maybe don't, hit me with this creature that I didn't happen to put an aura on, It's a way to kind of play the game and make sure that people stay away from your side. And that brings us to the end of the deck tech. Hope you guys enjoyed. As always, you can check out the full list in the description. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video and were able to take some inspiration for your own thrifty decks. Comment down below if you think of any cards I missed or could have replaced. This is an educational channel, so additional insight and information is always welcome. In addition, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you all for sticking around, and until next time, stay thrifty.